Welcome to your deep dive into the book of Genesis. We're tackling some seriously thought-provoking excerpts you sent in creation, humanity's ups and downs, those epic family sagas. Forget dusty Old Testaments, we're about to unlock some ancient wisdom. You ready?
Absolutely. Genesis gets simplified, but it's layered. Understanding its themes, it can shed light on everything, from human nature to our search for meaning.
Okay, let's unpack that. Your sources highlight how Genesis is structured. First, primeval history, that big cosmic stuff.
Right.
Then we zoom in on the patriarchs, those more personal stories. It's like a history book that becomes a family drama, right?
Right, exactly. That structure is key.
Mhm.
First, God's power, the order of creation. Then it dives into human choice within that creation. That's the drama.
Speaking of creation, your excerpt, it breaks down those 6 days, light sky, land, bam, bam, bam. But what gets me is day 4, the sun and moon after plants. It's like ancient minds playing cosmic
So you
Tetris.
have to remember, it's not a literal science textbook.
Right, right.
The emphasis is on separation, order light from darkness, waters above and below. It's about God imposing structure on chaos. It's a concept many cultures have wrestled with.
Makes you realize how much weight these stories carry. We'd be remiss not to talk about the story Garden of Eden, forbidden fruit, talking snake. I mean, come on.
Classic.
But your excerpt, it calls it a tension between obedience and autonomy. Deep.
Because the fall, it isn't just about breaking a rule. It's
Yeah.
about that human struggle following a set path versus making your own. Adam and Eve, they chose knowledge over obedience. It echoes through every generation.
It's true. And it makes you think, like, what impact did that choice really have? Everything changes after that, doesn't it?
It does. The impact is huge. And that's what's so fascinating. It's not just about the consequences, but how that choice ripples outward, affecting everything that comes after.
And that impact is huge, right? It's like that choice set the stage for this ongoing struggle between our desire for knowledge and our need for boundaries. But speaking of impact, we can't forget about Cain and Abel, jealousy, murder, talk about family drama. But even then, God shows mercy. It's like humans mess up, there are consequences, but there's this thread of grace woven through it all.
Precisely. It's not about a vengeful God doling out punishments, but about the natural outcomes of our choices. Even the flood, while a judgment on humanity's wickedness, leads to a covenant with Noah, a promise of renewal, a fresh start.
It's interesting how that idea of a fresh start pops up again, isn't it? Because now we're headed to the Tower of Babel, where humanity tries to build their way to God, talk about ambition, but then, bam, language is all messed up, people scattered across the earth. Your source links it to cultural diversity, which is fascinating.
It makes you think about the consequences of pride, of striving without understanding. The legacy of Babel is often seen as languages dividing us, but some interpret it as a reminder that diversity is part of God's plan, not a punishment. What do you think? Do you see it as a curse or a hidden blessing?
That's a really thought-provoking question. It's like instead of one giant monoculture, we get this tapestry of languages, traditions, perspectives. It makes you appreciate the variety out there, even if it gets messy sometimes.
And perhaps that messiness is part of the beauty. But speaking of beautiful tapestries, we can't forget the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. It's like the original chosen family saga, full of tests, triumphs, and, let's be honest, some serious drama.
Oh, for sure. But their stories, even thousands of years later, feel so human, so relatable. Take Abraham leaving everything to follow God's call, wrestling with doubt, then that whole near sacrifice of Isaac. Your source calls it a story about the terrifying choices faith sometimes demands. Intense stuff.
Absolutely. It's not about blindly following orders, but about the internal struggle of trusting in something bigger than ourselves, even when it doesn't make sense. Have you ever felt that pull, that tension between what you think you should do and what your gut is telling you? Abraham's story reminds us that even the most faithful among us grapple with doubt and uncertainty.
And that even those doubts and uncertainties can lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves and our faith. It's like sometimes you have to wrestle with the big questions to really appreciate the answers. It's like wrestling with those big questions is part of what makes us human. But speaking of wrestling, we can't forget Jacob, his whole life was a journey of transformation. Tricky fellow, but his encounter with God, wrestling all night, it's like he was wrestling with his own nature, trying to become someone better.
Exactly. And that struggle for self-improvement, that desire to be better than we were yesterday is something I think we can all relate to. But then there's Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery. Talk about a rough start.
Yeah.
Yet he ends up in a position of power, saving those same brothers and ultimately his whole family. Some masterclass in forgiveness and resilience.
It really makes you think about the power of forgiveness, doesn't it? And the idea that even in the darkest moments, there can be redemption, reconciliation, and ultimately a greater purpose revealed.
Precisely. Joseph's story reminds us that even when we can't see it, a bigger plan might be unfolding. It's about trusting that our struggles, our pains, even our mistakes can be woven into something meaningful. What stands out to you about his journey?
Honestly, it's that sense of hope. Like, no matter how bad things get, there's always a chance for things to turn around, which, when you think about it, is a recurring theme throughout Genesis, isn't it? From the creation of the world out of chaos to the promise of a new beginning after the flood to Joseph's rise from prisoner to prince, it's like this ancient text is whispering to us, don't give up, there's always hope.
Beautifully said. And that's what makes Genesis not just a beginning, but a foundation. It's not about giving us all the answers, but about framing the right questions. What does it mean to be made in God's image? What choices truly matter? How do we live with the consequences of those choices?
It's like Genesis is this incredibly dense, layered text that manages to be both universal and intensely personal. It grapples with these huge concepts, creation, choice, consequence, yet grounds them in stories of very flawed, very human characters. No wonder it still resonates with us thousands of years later.
It resonates because it reflects our own experiences back at us. The struggles, the triumphs, the doubts, the faith, they're all part of the human story. And Genesis reminds us that we're not alone in navigating those complexities.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Genesis, what's the one thing you really hope our listener takes away from all of this?
I hope they remember that Genesis isn't just a collection of ancient stories, but a living text that speaks to the very heart of what it means to be human. Keep those questions we talked about in mind as you move forward in your own life. You might be surprised by the answers you find and the person you become along the way.
Beautifully said. And for you, dear listener, we've only scratched the surface here. If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to go back to Genesis, maybe read it with fresh eyes and see what new insights emerge. Until next time, happy exploring.